This is Politics by Jake. The wounded are angry. The powerful, they're organized. And when those two forces meet, somebody usually gets rich. And today we're going to talk about who. Welcome. Welcome to Politics by Jake. This is the weekend show for the weekend of June 6th, 2026. This is part 2. This is the Sunday show, June 7th, 2026. And today we're going to conclude the series that if you go to Rumble or YouTube, you'll see it's entitled, Whom the Gods Destroy, They First Make Mad. And you know, I was going to do a 2-show arc on this, and then it turned into a trilogy because I had so much material. And I thought, I can't cover this adequately in 2 shows, so I've got to do more. And then I thought, well, you know, I can't do 3 shows because I did the first 2 last weekend. And I thought, if I do another show, if I do a Saturday show, and that was, of course, yesterday, I can't come back on Sunday and do something that's, you know, completely disconnected. And, you know, some of you don't know, the people who listen to this as a podcast, and welcome to the show, by the way, welcome to 2026, welcome to the fight. We're in a fight. There's no doubt about it. Besides being a podcast on YouTube and Rumble, which is, I know how a lot of you guys get this, this program is carried on a radio station, an actual radio station in California called KCAA. And it's heard in several large counties, pretty large counties in California. And it's also carried on Spotify. It's also carried on Spreaker. It's also carried on iHeart. And it's actually carried on, like the manager told me once, or the station owner told me once, it's carried on like 14 different channels. So it's a lot. So I decided that it would become a quarto. Now, what's a quarto? Quarto's an old word, okay? You hear it in literature, you hear it in music, and it's a work. It's what it is. It's a work in 4 parts. Quarto means 4. And all 4 parts bear the same title. And if you go on YouTube and you look at the title, each one of them says, Whom gods destroy, they first make mad. And there are part 1, part 2, part 3, and part 4. That's what we're doing. And this 4th and final installment is called The Wounded, the Powerful, and Predatory Extraction. So, you know, here we go. Let's go. Let's start doing this. Jamie Dimon stood at the World Economic Forum in Davos. And, of course, you might ask, who is Jamie Dimon? Jamie Dimon is the chairman, the chief executive officer of J.P. Morgan Chase. Much could be said about that. So he's at the World Economic Forum in Davos, which is in Switzerland, in January of 2024. And this is significant because this is 2024. This is not now. This is 2 years ago. And he's standing there and he announced at that time, and remember, the election between Biden and it turned out to be Harris, and this is like a whole other story. The election between Biden and Harris, Biden and Trump was, you know, going to occur. And pretty much everybody thought that, you know, Biden would be the candidate. It turned out that Biden was the candidate. He won all of the primaries. And we've talked yesterday on the show a little bit, and we could talk about it again today on the show, about what exactly happened. And it was basically a coup to remove Biden and Pelosi, Nancy Pelosi, whose husband is Paul Pelosi. And he is a financier, and he's very connected, very connected. Barack Obama, who, you know, looking at it from a standpoint is a little disappointment. Barack Obama Well, I'm going to get to him later in the show. I won't talk too much about him now. But Jamie Dimon stands in front of the world in January 2024, and he basically told the world that America's billionaire class was comfortable with Donald Trump. And he said, in effect, he said, we had our doubts. Now we're comfortable. We're all in for Donald Trump. And my question is, why? What exactly did they think that they were buying? Because billionaires, they don't spend money by accident. They don't acquire influence by accident. They certainly don't support political movements by accident. So today we're going to talk some about that. We're going to talk about the wounded, the powerful, and we're going to talk about predatory extraction. Over the past several programs, we have talked about extraordinary conclusions. We talked about how ordinary people arrive at extraordinary beliefs. On yesterday's show, I showed you a man who thinks that Donald Trump is the hand of God. And he's not a raving lunatic. He's not a wild-eyed fanatic. He's just like a normal guy. And yet he came to this extraordinary belief. We've talked about accountability. We've talked about institutions. We've talked about power. And today, I want to ask what may be the most important question of all. Who benefits? And this is a question that the Romans asked, and they handed down to us in the statement cui bono, which literally means to whose good. And the saying is cui bono, cui prodest. Who benefits? Because whenever you see a political movement, whenever you see a war, whenever you see a crisis, whenever you see a policy, one of the questions that you absolutely, positively must ask first, cui bono? Who benefits? And that brings us to a concept that Americans are often uncomfortable discussing. And that concept is class struggle. Now, most Americans hear the word class struggle and they just immediately shut off. They immediately stop listening because they hear Marx. They hear Lenin in these things. They hear things like Soviet Russia. And I want you to forget all that, and I want to reduce this because it's important to reduce it. Because I know that you guys don't know or care particularly, and there may be a couple of you out there, about these highfalutin principles that sometimes Jake talks about. You know, like capitalism or communism or oligarchs or technocrats or things like this. And it's important that we reduce these things to elements that everybody can appreciate and understand, not because you're stupid, but because it's elemental. You know, Frank Capra had a series of films in the 1940s. He was a popular, well-known director in Hollywood, and he had a series of films, and they were to explain to Americans why they were at war, because Americans didn't want to be at war. They didn't want to do war at all. And it was called Why We Fight. And he was able to reduce things excellently to things, concepts, ideas that everybody could understand. And that's what I want to do. I kind of want to be Frank Capra. So when I talk about class struggle, I'm not endorsing Marxism because, you know, Karl Marx talked about class struggle and the necessity of class struggle and all the all the Marxists and Leninists, they all talked about that. And this is a careful distinction that I need to make here. I'm not talking about Leninism. This is not an endorsement of communism. Jake is a capitalist, you know. Now, I believe in a certain kind of capitalism. I believe in a highly regulated capitalism because that works for everybody. The New Deal was a kind of a capitalism that worked for everybody. And you still have the New Deal around today. And the other side of the class struggle is fighting against it. And why are they fighting against it? Because the money is going into that. And they have this sickness, which I call predatory extraction. And they want that. One of the things that I used to talk about that I don't talk about too much anymore, but it's still a thing, is the privatization of the Postal Service. And the Postal Service has been privatized to a great extent. You see having arisen Federal Express, and you see private mailbox companies, and you see private carriers that are competing with the Postal Service. Why? There's money there. And these predatory extractors want that money. They want it. It's a big pot of money that goes to the Postal Service every year. They don't like that. And you may say, and rightly so, well, you know, I like the Postal Service. I think the Postal Service is okay. They don't care about that because they're possessed of a different animus and spirit and viewpoint. This is one of the reasons why, and I may be getting a little off the track here, but this is one of the reasons why Jamie Dimon said this about Donald Trump, because they see Donald Trump. They see that he's weak. They see that he fawns over dictators and emperors. They see that he loves them. They know what Ivana said, how of all the books that he kept on his nightstand, the one that was there was a book of Hitler's speeches. They know all this. And they know he can be had. They know that they can wave money in his face because they know that he said in 2016 during the campaign, he said, all I know from the earliest time that I could remember was that I had to get all I could get. And he even made grabbing motions, just like this, calling down, if it were possible, things that he didn't have from the very heavens above. And they knew that they could piggyback off him to get gain and to take a spoil. There's a scriptural phrase. And to plunder, to use the United States government, the power of it, in order to do things that the Constitution did not establish that government to do. They knew that they could do deals through him. They knew that they could manipulate the economy through him. They knew that they could take money out of the Treasury through him. And yeah, he's doing it too. He's absolutely doing it. He's absolutely enriching himself off of that, and he knows he is. And this is why he has Todd Blanche doing everything that he can to make sure that it's illegal to put him in prison. It's illegal for the IRS to either audit him or audit members of his family. He knows this. And he knows that if he loses the 2026 midterms, he's very likely going to prison. And that's why he's doing these things. All of these absurd things that he's doing that have never been done before, and that are going to go up to the Supreme Court, which he has packed. People who are like him, who want to obey his will, and moreover, who believe in the concept of the unitary executive, which basically is a king, which started with Ronald Reagan, who said, I want a line item veto. When the Congress brings a budget to me, I want to be able to veto things in it. Just write veto next to a line item. That's why it's called the line item veto. Postal Service, $1 million, vetoed. Help for the poor, vetoed. Free health care, vetoed. That's what he wanted to do. He wanted those kinds of powers. And there are people in this country who love that and who want that. Why? Not because it benefits Donald Trump, but because it benefits them. Because they can ride this guy. They know their man. And that's what Jamie Dimon was talking about. So I'm not endorsing Marxism. I'm not endorsing communism. I'm making an observation. Marx was wrong about many things. Lenin was wrong about many things. Stalin was wrong about almost everything. Stalin, there's a photo of him, and it's a photo of when he had his news given to him that Hitler had invaded. And it's sad, and he's dejected. And I look at a photo like that, and I say, why is he sad? Why is he dejected? Well, I'll tell you why I think he was sad, because I know, well, I should say it's my opinion, but I know that he had many of his forces and many of his support logistics in forward positions right up against the border. And I think he intended to attack Germany. And the reason that he was sad was because Hitler got to him a couple of weeks before he did. And there's an excellent book by a man named Suvorov, and it's called The Icebreaker. And that's basically the story of it, why this happened. And people argue over the reasons why this occurred, but nobody argues that Stalin had lots of his forces in forward positions. And when Hitler crossed the border and attacked, he took a spoil. He took many prisoners. He got all sorts of ordnance, all sorts of munitions, all sorts of logistics, all sorts of supplies. So, and that's a little off the track. But Stalin was wrong about almost everything. Communist systems unquestionably devolved into authoritarianism. Once again, power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. Central planning, one of the hallmarks of communism, failed. It failed. Power corrupted it. Absolute power corrupted it exactly. But none of this proves that class conflict does not exist. I mean, there's a saying, and it's a pretty good saying. And, you know, some sayings reduce things to such simplicity that everybody can understand, and that's what I want to do. And this particular saying is this: even a broken clock is right twice a day. And there's another saying: even a blind squirrel is able to find a few nuts every once in a while. So don't take what Marx said, and to use another saying, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. Class conflict exists. There are classes. It is very much us versus them. There is class conflict. There is class struggle. The only thing is that you, my listeners, and I don't think that there are very many billionaires listening to me at the present time, you, my listeners, are being dissuaded that there is any sort of struggle because you like to think that we're all Americans, like the Seneca Indian on Grant's staff. We're all Americans. That's what you want. I know that that's what you want. That's what I want. My sensibilities tell me that that is the best thing, and it embodies the greatest part of America, that we are all equal and we are all Americans. But I'm telling you, they don't think that way. And that's why I say welcome to the fight, because it's a fight. Because it's a fight for the soul of America, and it really is. Because the soul of America is under attack, and the soul of America is being corrupted. And the midterms, if we can't take back the House, if we can't take back the Senate, get 60 votes. 60 votes in the Senate is the thing. Get that. If we can't do that, we may see the experiment in democracy devolve into true oligarchy, and it won't end there. And at this point, we've talked for a long time. Let's let the stations break themselves, and we'll get you a couple for you guys listening on the podcast. We got a couple of messages for you, and we'll do that. And this is Politics by Jake, and we'll. And now here's a word from one of our sponsors, Twain Consulting. Hi, this is Jake with Twain Consulting. Let's be blunt, shall we? America is litigious. It's unstable, and it's financially weaponized. If your name is on everything you own, you're a sitting duck. At Twain Consulting, we help you vanish legally, ethically, and permanently. From land trusts to layered LLCs, we teach you how to restructure your assets so the predators can't see them and can't touch them. This isn't a loophole. It's a strategy that the wealthy have used for decades. Isn't it time you got the same protection? Call Twain Consulting at 805-380-5699 or visit us online. Protect what's yours before someone else claims it. And now let's get back to Jake and Politics by Jake. All right, this is Politics by Jake, and we're back. On Politics by Jake, I break down political and economic realities so you can understand what's actually happening in the world, and consequently and concordantly, how to position yourself so that you benefit from that and you protect yourself against all these exigencies that are occurring. If you want this applied directly to your situation, I offer private one-on-one strategy sessions. The link is in the description. Thus having said, let's continue. Now, we ended our discussion in the first segment talking about how absolute power corrupts absolutely. And, when I heard that, I thought, oh, I could wield absolute power and it wouldn't corrupt me absolutely. But I think the old Romans knew a thing or two. And corruption can proceed apace, and it is proceeding apace in the body politic of the United States of America, and it is prospering wonderfully. It is prospering marvelously. So none of that proves that class conflict does not exist. In fact, that arguably is at the root of it. Ask yourself a simple question. I want to make this simple for you guys. Ask yourself a simple question. Do billionaires have the same interests as factory workers? This is something that I want you maggots, you make America great again types, to ask yourself, because you have been deceived. And I tell you, I'm on your side, and we're going to be talking about on the show. And I will explain to you what happened to you, and I will explain it in terms that you can understand. And I will explain how you were deceived and manipulated. And I would explain to you that you are right to be angry because you are broken. But again, I ask you, in preface to those comments that I will make, do billionaires have the same interests as factory workers? Do oligarchs like Elon Musk, do they have the same interests as people living to paycheck to paycheck? Do they? I ask you. Well, and I would answer that question for you. Very often they do not. Not at all. And where interests diverge, conflict can emerge. And that conflict is real. Now, let's go ahead and talk about the wound. This is where the story becomes tragic. And I talked about this on the show yesterday, and I've talked about it before, and I'm going to talk about it again because it bears repeating again and again and again and again. This is globalization that I'm going to talk about. The idea behind globalization, and I call it globaloney, at the end of World War II, and Rockefeller is involved in this, Zbigniew Brzezinski is involved in this. This is real, guys, and this happened while it was going on earlier in not earlier decades, but in the late decades of the 20th century. People like to say that what I'm about to tell you was the stuff of conspiracy theory, but it wasn't. And that is that at the end of World War II, the world economies basically lay in ruins and had not been destroyed, but had been severely demeaned. And this group, and they're called the Trilateral Commission, and the name in a moment will become incredibly obvious. The Trilateral Commission viewed the world as divided into three economic blocks, and they thought that there was a great disparity because of the enormous strength of the American industrial and technological economy. And the economies of Europe and the economies of the East were in ruins. They were in tatters. I mean, they were there, but, not really. Nothing like the United States. And so the idea was to make these other two equal. And that sounds okay in theory, but the way they did it was the thing that was so troubling, because the way they did it was to take from the power and the strength of the United States and to move it to these other areas. Now, what happened, there were 60,000 factories or industries, industries, call them what you will, in the United States of America. And they were basically hollowed out. They were sold. Some of them were busted out, just like in the movie Goodfellas, when the poor restaurateur was co-opted by the criminals, by the gang, by the mob, and they took everything out of the restaurant that they could. And when they finally couldn't borrow another nickel, when they couldn't take another thing out of it, they would set it on fire, and they would collect the insurance money on it. It was a very complete criminal enterprise. And this is the same thing. They took American industry, American power, and they took it away from Americans. And they would take these industries and sell them either whole cloth, or some of them they parted out, they pieced them out. And they sold it to governments who were often enemies of the government of the United States of America. And I hasten to make the distinction, not the people. Iran, for example, who we are in this disgusting war with right now, that we didn't start and that we didn't want, and that was incredibly ill-advised. The Iranian people are some of the most pro-American people that there are. And yet, they're being killed at the behest of Donald Trump, who wants to take a spoil, who sees the grift and the con, who sees everything from the economic angle. So the question I would ask is, what happens when you take away 60,000, not 60,000, let's start with one. What happens when you have a factory town, an industry town, just whatever it is, and they're making widgets or just whatever it is? A town grows up around it, and what do you get? You get infrastructure, you get collateral businesses. Maybe some of the businesses are other factories that are making, say, let's use the example of widgets. Maybe they're making parts for the widgets. And maybe you have design companies that are making better designs for the widgets, new and improved widgets. You have people who come to these towns and they work and they decide that they like it and it's a steady paycheck and that they can pay their bills and they can have a little left over for discretionary spending. They meet someone, they get married, they have kids. These kids have to have schools. So all of a sudden you have school systems. You have businesses of all kinds. You have grocery stores, you have department stores, you have clothing stores, you have all sorts of stores selling all sorts of things that grow up around this factory or this industry. And the infrastructure, which could be a municipality, it could be city, it could be a county, it could be a village, is supported by the property and other taxes that the people pay. Now take that factory away. What happens? All of a sudden, those people who had a job don't have a job anymore. All of a sudden, those people who thought they could retire, they can't retire anymore. And let me say, and I want to say this because I don't want to forget it because this is important. Perhaps the most important part of the curse of globalization upon the American people was that the standard of living of people of the United States was cut in half. Cut in half. Not 10%, not 20%, not 30%, half. And what happens to families? What happens to people? What happens to a man when he can no longer support his family? What happens to a man when he can't buy food anymore? What happens to a man when he can't send his children to school anymore? What happens when he can't buy clothing for anymore? You could say, well, you're getting a little excited here, Jake, but no, I'm not, because this is what happened. What happened when a man who wants to take care of his own has to send his kids out to do paper routes and jobs when they should be home studying, has to send his wife off to work, all with the idea of female independence? This has nothing to do with it. It has to do with the feelings and sensibilities of a man. And I don't say all men, but most men are this way. They want to take care of their loved ones. They want to provide. What happens when you take that away? You get hollowed out communities. You get, as I said, a declining standard of living. You get family instability. You get foreclosures. People lose their houses. You get economic trauma of every kind, like several of which kinds I have just described. You get bankruptcy. You get people feeling like they're failures. You get people who start drinking and become addicted to controlled substances, to get rich quick schemes where they lose even more money than the little money that they still had left. You get bankruptcy. You get suicide. Cultural trauma, social trauma. And when people are wounded, they become depressed and they become anxious, but they also become angry and they're looking around for a reason. They're looking around for someone to attack because they become enormously frustrated. They look for explanations. They become vulnerable to extraordinary claims and conclusions. Would we not call these wounded people? This is why Make America Great Again, MAGA exists. This is why anger exists. This is why frustration exists. This is why extraordinary conclusions exist. So you can't understand political radicalization, not really, unless you understand the wound. And that's what I'm trying to explain to you now. And you maggots who are listening to me out there, I get it. I get that you were wounded. But once again, I say to you, as I said in the first segment, or it was at the beginning of this segment, do oligarchs have the same interests with you? You wounded? Do you think they have the same interests? Do you think they have the same ideas? Do you think Donald Trump cares about you? He's telling you, I'm going to make it great again. And who is Donald Trump? Donald Trump's mantra is, it's so unfair. I've been so abused. Everything is so bad against me. Everyone's taking advantage of me. It's so unfair. And, he's a failed businessman. I mean, he's literally failed at business 6 ways from Sunday. He got something like $413 million, which he inherited from his father. He just completely blew that out. He tried various ventures, Trump Steaks, Trump Vodka, Trump this, Trump that, Trump University, failed at all of them. I believe went bankrupt, although I'm not going to look into that too much. Here's a man who's enriched himself in the presidency, 34-time felon. Why was that? Falsifying business records so he could make money. He's a rapist. E. Jean Carroll. You've heard about that in the news. What do you think that's about? Why do you think he's suing her? Because he can't have it said that he's a rapist. And I'm sorry. He's mentally ill. He's a malignant narcissist. Hundreds of mental health workers have come out long since and talked about the dangerous case of Donald Trump. Bandy Exley is one of them. There are many others. His own niece, estranged niece, Mary, talks about this all the time. This is absolutely the guy that you don't want in the presidency. So, okay. Why were billionaires so comfortable with Trump? Why were they enthusiastic? Why did Jamie Dimon, chief executive officer of JP Morgan and Chase, why did they say this? Why did he say this? Why did they say, we're on board with Trump? Boy, we're enthusiastic about this guy. We think that this guy is the cat's meow. Why did they do that? At this point, I think we're probably going to take another break. I wanted to go 20 minutes, but I think we're not going to. But let's take a break. You and the podcast got some commercials for you, and the KCAA can break itself, and then we'll be back. This is Politics. And now here's a word from one of our sponsors, Twain Consulting. Hi, this is Jake with Twain Consulting. Imagine, if you will, having the power to disappear from the prying eyes of creditors, identity thieves, nosy strangers, all while protecting what you've worked so hard to build. That's what virtual invisibility offers. It's not magic. It's smart legal and business strategy to shield your assets and privacy so you can live free, confident, and in control. Most people think that asset protection is only for the ultra-wealthy, but it's for anyone who wants peace of mind and financial security, including you. Don't wait until it's too late. Take control now. Call me at 213-465-0639 or go to facebook.com/Twain Consulting to learn how virtual invisibility can protect you and your family, because when you're invisible to risk, you're unstoppable. Now let's get back to Jake and Politics by Jake. All right, this is Politics by Jake, and I am back. We are back. And Politics by Jake, what I do on this show is I break down political and economic realities so you can understand what's actually happening in the world, and concordantly, so that you can position yourself to your best benefit in order to protect yourself and to enhance your own wealth. If you want the kinds of things that I'm doing, because I'm a business advisor, you see, and a consultant. Decades in the legal and business realm. If you want my knowledge and experience applied directly to your situation, I do offer private one-on-one strategy sessions. And the link is in the description. And with that, let's go on with our examination. So you have, and I've talked about Jamie Dimon at Davos, at the World Economic Forum. I've talked about why he said what he said. And he's possessed of this idea of predatory extraction. He says we're all in the tank for Trump. Well, I didn't say we're all in the tank for Trump. But he said we're all there. We're all in support of Donald Trump. We're all behind Donald Trump. Why do you think he said that? He said it because like I said before, there's a class struggle going on, and they're trying to not let you know that it's going on. They come to you, and I remember this, that the talking heads on the shows would never talk about globalization in a way that anybody could understand. Ordinary Americans didn't understand it. They understood that globalization was going on, but it wasn't broken down so that ordinary Americans could understand it, except in retrospect if they wanted to actually look into it. And this is contrary to the concept. Why would you take the industrial and economic might of America and transfer it to other nations? What's going on? Why would you do that? If you want to help other nations, Americans always want to give people a helping hand. We are a nation of goodwill. We always have been. But why would you want to whole cloth or piece out all of American industrial and technological might and send it to other nations to the diminishment of America? That's what the Trilateral Commission wanted to do. That's what they wanted to do. Now, I'm not kidding around. And they tried to keep it from you. And they tried to consign it to the realm of conspiracy theory. Oh, that Jake, he's just a conspiracy theorist. No, they exist. Their offices were their offices were right there in New York City. And they existed. There's nothing conspiratorial about them. They're there. And this is what they wanted to do. And now that they've done it, they've moved on to other things. This is contrary to the constitutional philosophy of the reason why the United States was established. The United States was not established so that billionaires could take a spoil and could get rich. Although, it is, and if you were to come to me and say this, I would say, the first thing you want to do is get rich. Even Deng Xiaoping of the Communist Party back in the days of Mao, when they were changing from the Maoist philosophy, which once again was a failure, Mao Zedong, one of the great mass murderers of the 20th century, just killed, I don't have the numbers on me, but he killed many people. He killed his own people too. And even Deng Xiaoping said, it is glorious to get rich. Let's everyone get rich, because they were shifting over, you see. They're doing this hybrid between unregulated predatory capitalism, and and they're going to keep the communist part of it. They're going to keep the iron rice bowl part, which the iron rice bowl part is, you stay out of politics and you leave that to us. And we'll make sure you get a bowl of rice 3 meals a day. That's called the iron rice bowl. That's the compact between the Chinese communists, and they do still declare themselves Chinese communists, and the economic predatory capitalist system and the people. That's what they call it. So, okay. So, is this deep concern that they have for ordinary Americans? Does it bespeak itself to that globalization, or as I have heard it called, globaloney? Does it bespeak itself to ordinary Americans like the maggots, the wounded followers who bought Donald Trump when he said, I can make America great again. I can heal you. Donald Trump has no desire and no inkling and no care for you. He thinks that you maggots who are listening to me now, he thinks you are suckers. He thinks you are marks. Because that's what his dad taught him. And he thinks you're there to be taken. He thinks we're all there to be taken. Well, that was kind of a rant, wasn't it? Ooh, sorry about that. Jake rants every once in a while, but that's it. You've been deceived. But you haven't only been deceived by Donald Trump. Donald Trump was the one who came and said that he could make America great again. What he wants to do is he wants to destroy America because everything is so unfair. You see, he's a malignant narcissist. And one of the things that malignant narcissists like to do is they like to inflict pain and cruelty upon other people. I know, you think, what is Jake talking about? But it's true. Look it up. This wonder of the internet will tell you all these things that I am telling you. That is one of the aspects of a malignant narcissist. That is why they're so dangerous. So, was this genuine concern for Americans, or was it economic opportunity? Did these billionaires and these bankers see economic opportunity, but the only way they could do it was to transfer the wealth of the United States to other places so that they could work their schemes on that? This is like Bretton Woods. Bretton Woods was called the New Deal for the world. And Bretton Woods, one of the things that it did several things, but it fixed the exchange rates. And they were all tied to the dollar, 6 Deutschmarks made $1, 3 francs made $1. I'm just kind of making this stuff up. Maybe I shouldn't, but I'm just trying to give you the idea. 20 yen made $1. 1,000 won made $1. This was what Bretton Woods was. And this drove the speculators wild, because what do the speculators like to do? They like to speculate with money, with different kinds of money. With Bretton Woods in place, you couldn't do that. That was the importance of Richard Nixon, because Richard Nixon took everybody off Bretton Woods so that the speculators could speculate and make money. That's what that was all about. It's not what Bretton Woods was about. Bretton Woods was, it helped maintain financial uniformity and calmness so that these kinds of things were stable and these kinds of things did not occur. So you had deregulation. You have government contracts, you have privatization, you have access to Treasury resources. You see, this is what they wanted. They wanted deregulation. You heard me talk about capitalism and how I'm a capitalist. I like capitalism, but it has to be highly regulated. Why? Because you keep people like people who have this disease and the sickness of predatory extraction, you keep them under control. Now they're not under control. Things get privatized, like the post office, they can take the money. Access to Treasury resources. You have Larry and David Ellison. They have bought up many media sources, including CBS. They have no knowledge of media. It's just like Fox News. Fox News is owned by a billionaire. One American News Network, owned by a billionaire. Newsmax, owned by a billionaire. Media ownership, concentration of wealth, people getting their messages across, because it's so unfair how these media people are treating treating us billionaires. We're getting a bad shake. We're going to buy up all of the media sources so we can tell our story. This is the kind of argument that makes itself. Why do you have to buy up all the media sources so that you can tell your story? Oh, we don't think that they're telling it, so we want to tell. Really? You don't think that? You don't think that the media is telling the truth about you? It's the argument that makes itself. You have a concentration of wealth, you have a concentration of influence, and so, don't ask what they say. Don't ask what benefits. Follow the incentives, will you? Find out where the money's going. Find out who gets the money. And when you begin to follow the incentives, you begin seeing the same pattern repeatedly. Who benefits? Who gets the relief? Who absorbs the losses? And I actually, once again, I didn't want to. I wanted to keep talking, but let's break the station once again and let's have another message. This is Politics by Jake, and we'll be right back. And now here's a word from one of our sponsors, Twain Consulting. Hi, this is Jake with Twain Consulting. Let's be blunt, shall we? America is litigious. It's unstable, and it's financially weaponized. If your name is on everything you own, you're a sitting duck. At Twain Consulting, we help you vanish legally, ethically, and permanently. From land trusts to layered LLCs, we teach you how to restructure your assets so the predators can't see them and can't touch them. This isn't a loophole. It's a strategy that the wealthy have used for decades. Isn't it time you got the same protection? Call Twain Consulting at 805-380-5699 or visit us online. Protect what's yours before someone else claims it. And now let's get back to Jake and Politics by Jake. All right, this is Politics by Jake, and we're back. On Politics by Jake, I break down political and economic reality so you can understand what actually is happening in the world and how to position yourself. If you want that applied directly to your situation, I do offer private one-on-one strategy sessions, and the link is in the description. So let's go ahead and kind of sum up here because, we're getting to the end. We've arrived at the end of this series, and I'm kind of sorry because there's a lot of other things that I would like to talk about. The wounded become angry. The powerful, they learn to absorb that anger. They learn to organize that anger. And predatory extraction, which I've described as a disease. It's not wrong to be a capitalist. It's not wrong to want to make your way in the world. It's not wrong to want to earn money. It's not wrong to use the system to become rich. I'm with Confucius. I'm with Deng Xiaoping. To become rich is glorious. But predatory extraction, where you use the system to gain to yourself and destroy the other person, that's a sickness. That works for one or two people, and it doesn't work for a million others. And that's the lesson I'm trying to get here. That is the pattern. And that is why I keep asking the same question over and over. Who benefits? Not who talks the loudest, not who waves the biggest flag, not who has the best promises, not who says, I can make America great again, to people who are already devastated and destroyed by a person who wants nothing more except to be like the people who originally devastated and destroyed you. And if you can see through that fog, if you can answer that question, you can see through much of what passes for politics. You can see through much of what passes for media, and you can see through much of what passes for public debate. Follow the incentives, follow the money, follow the power, and ask yourself, who benefits? Because if you understand that, you're much harder to fool. And this This is Politics by Jake.